got something coming through. People can see my screen. People can see me online. Life is good. So I'm going to be talking about the Azure Pricing Calculator today. So this is just a tool that Microsoft has provided us in order to come up with reasonable estimates for the projects that we're going to build. So we're going to start with a couple of different things here. Really, there we go. I want to answer a couple of questions. First, talking about why would we want to do something? What are we doing? Where is it? And then how? Obviously, this is a very short presentation, so we're just going to gloss over a lot of things, but we'll talk about what's really, really useful and what three main tips that you guys want to make sure that you understand when you go into pricing out a project like this. So let's talk about why we want to do anything first off. Why do you want to do any sort of pricing? Failure to plan is planning to fail. It's the old Boy Scout model, or one of the many Boy Scout models that I learned growing up. And if you just start building components, you are going to run into cost overruns. You'll end up having a dedicated SQL pool that is running over the weekend, and you'll end up running about $1,000 because you provisioned it too high and nobody's actually querying it. I have run into clients who have done that. And it's definitely a good learning opportunity to be part of. But it also allows you to understand what your operating costs are going to be over the lifetime of a project. And knowing what your costs are going to be is really, really nice for management to be able to make decisions around this type of thing. So what is the pricing calculator? It's two things. It's a library of the components that exist. So VMs, networking. I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the Synapse components today. And it goes into what are their associated cost models. So am I charged for the actual volume of resources that I'm using in terms of, say, storage? Or am I charged in terms of how much is something up and running, like a dedicated SQL pool, Spark pools, things like that? So where are we going to find this? This is just on azure.microsoft.com, blah, 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 pricing calculator. If you just go to azure.microsoft.com, you'll find it across the top under that pricing banner. In fact, let me just go over there right now. You can see, where am I? Right here. So if I'm just on the home page up here, just go to pricing, and there's a number of different tools in this section over here. I'm just going to the pricing calculator. Easy place to find it. We'll go through an example very quickly here. There's a couple of different things that you need to do in order to estimate your workloads accurately. We need to know, what am I using? So you need to understand what's the base architecture of your actual project. So if I'm doing a Synapse data lakehouse implementation, this is a pretty standard things that lots of companies are migrating towards. I'm going to be using a Synapse instance with pipelines. That's for getting data from wherever it lies into my central location. I'm going to be using some Spark pools to do some of that transformation or curation of the data. And I'm going to be using a dedicated SQL pool in order to actually serve this data to my underlying users or Power BI or something like that. So you want to have hard boundaries for what's actually included in the project. So I'm not including, say, Power BI licensing. I'm not including my networking costs. These are, outside of what I'm going to price for this type of project. Once you've actually chosen that architecture, once you've actually chosen the components that you're going to be using, you need to understand how are you charged for each of those components. Like I said, storage, you're charged based off of the actual amount of data that's in there, or dedicated SQL pool, you're charged for it being up and running. Is it available to my end users? The hard part is that last one. What does my workload look like? So here's an example architecture that we use pretty regularly within our company. we'll go out to clients. They've got either on-prem or cloud data sources. That data needs to be centralized because they don't want to have analytical queries being run against their source systems. So we batch it out overnight, patch it all together, and then serve it up out the other side. This is good, and it's a pretty standard architecture, but it doesn't actually tell you what the underlying workload is. So to give you guys an example of what going back to the old Kimball dimensional model star schema, and yes, it's old, but it works. It's a very good schema, especially for folks that are using technology like Power BI. This is a reasonable idea of what it's going to look like. I might have one fact, I might have 6 dimensions, and all of that is made up of 50 tables. So each one of those has various components that I'm going to be charged for. For example, my source tables, everything that's on the very far left-hand side, I'm not going to be charged for those. That's the source. I don't need to worry about that. Once I actually get it into files, my Parquet files, I am being charged for that. That's going to be housed in my data lake. And I'm going to be charged on the integration runtime because it's actually transferring from that source to my file location. Then when I do the transformation going from the file systems to say my dimensions, my other fact tables, I'm going to be using something like Spark. It's going to be charged for the time that it takes to process. So you need to understand that type of thing. So if I go over to the pricing calculator, what's really nice about this is it does have some interesting example scenarios for you, one of which is an enterprise data warehouse. And we can just say add to estimate. This is going to give us a pretty good idea of what the components are. But I find that it provisions your things a little bit strangely because I'm being charged $15,000 for storage accounts, but only, what, $1,700 for my dedicated SQL pools. I find those pretty skewed in my experience for this type of use case. So you need to understand some of those components. And let's just talk about a couple of things that you may or may not want to look at. This architecture does not include any sort of Apache Spark pool. So I might want to include something like that. That's going to be charged for the uptime. I might need to include some, let's use integration pipelines. So that's migrating data from where it lies to where I need it to be in the underlying data lake. We might use data flows to transfer my data, might use Spark. Doesn't depends on the underlying architecture. But what I really want you guys to think about is how can I understand my underlying workload? So that's honestly the basis for this little tidbit is estimate your underlying workload before you actually estimate the greater implementation. And just to give you guys an idea of what some of these things will look like, I did a test with extracting data out of CRM. One instance of pulling out of Dynamics, I think it was the activity party table in there. So you have activities that have associated parties. I have 500,000 rows coming out of this on a daily basis. When it actually gets stored, so a single file in a single day, or a single run, I'm getting 26 megs of data, and it took 2 minutes and 33 seconds to extract. So you can use actual data to do proper estimates. The screenshot at the bottom here, that is one of my Spark notebooks. It took me 1 minute and 20 seconds to integrate a couple of pieces of data together. So again, I can use these types of things to extrapolate and expand. If I need to do this 50 times a day, and then I do that, maybe I should probably, you'd run that 4 or 5 times a day, multiply that by a year, multiply that by 2 years, because oftentimes you want multiple years worth of data in your underlying data lake. you start to you get a more realistic number than just clicking add to estimate. I think that's all the time I've actually got. I know I'm running like 5 minutes over for our tidbit, but like I said, biggest thing you want to do this based off of real data. Spin up an instance of things that you know you're not going to be charged for the by the second it's going to be up, and do some testing while you do that estimation. All right, thanks everybody.